Hi, this is Scott from lsdac.com. We're moving on to the disassembly of our fuel pump module that came out of our 1999 Dakota RT truck that we're converting to an LS motor. As I'd shown in a previous video, how to remove the gas tank, how to remove the fuel pump assembly from the tank itself. This pump has actually already been broken down, but I'm going to go through the steps real quick. One of the first things you're going to do is you're going to pull off the stock regulator that comes out of this little rubber hole, and you're going to make a cut on that, and you're going to throw that away. That won't be used again. The next thing you're going to do is you're going to take a screwdriver and you're going to go up inside these little tabs, and you're going to have to click all three tabs and get this top loose. I'm not saying it's an easy job. This was never designed to be serviced, but if you take right in here, you can get those lifted up one at a time. You can get this open. When you get to that point, you can reach up in there with a pair of long pliers, and you can get a hold of the connector, and you can disconnect the connector. And that also includes the fuel level relay. As you notice, my fuel level relay has been modified. I'm going to do something a little bit different, but yours would be brown wires connected to this assembly, and you take that top off and you retain that. Next thing you're going to do is you're going to have to depen this plug. Now, depenning this plug is a little bit of a trick, but it has to be done in order to change out the fuel pump inside this basket. What I do is I take a small, straight, flat screwdriver that I've ground the sides down on just a little bit so it fits right down in here. And the idea is you go, I wish I could show this to you. Maybe I'll do a close-up on a different video, but what you do is you go right down between the metal and the plastic, and you lift it back, and when you lift it back it comes right out. You do that again, and I'll see, let me see if I can set up a little bit better lighting on another one and do it again. They actually come out real easy. Come just a little bit closer. You'll see the metal is in the top hole if you're looking at it in this direction, with the sort of retaining clips on the bottom. Go right between the metal and the plastic clip, and you actually lift it towards you, and then that clip should slide right out, and that's for all four of those. Like I said, I took a small flat blade screwdriver and I actually ground the edges down a little bit so that it fit in there better. If you have any trouble pulling on those wires when you're trying to depen them, you don't have them unlocked. They should just fall right out when you pull that pin back correctly. You're going to retain this clip as well because you will need that for your rebuild. Next hardest thing to do with this fuel pump basket is to get this inner sleeve out. The trick to that, if you flip it over, right up inside this little hole where the fuel pump, fuel level sender wires go, there's actually a clip inside there it's round and it's got two sides on it. And it's a real pain in the ass, I'll be honest with you, to get out. Trying various tools to get up inside there, but what you have to do is pinch those or slide two long screwdrivers or something, get those compressed, and you'll find that that will release and come out easily. Same as with the connector itself. If it doesn't start to come out easily, you don't have them unclipped. Now, if they break off, that's not a big deal, at least with the kit that I'm providing, because we're going to actually have a replacement inner sleeve. When you get that out, what you're going to do is you're going to carefully feed all the wires through the holes and get that completely out. And the fuel pump itself should lift right out, and you can go ahead and work that on out of the inner basket or not, doesn't matter. We're not retaining any of this in my kit. If you're just buying a Walbro 255 pump to put in here, you're going to have to reuse all these parts. But basically you get the idea, you just pull everything through, retain that. In my case, it's gone. I'm going to go ahead and leave these wires the way they are. Like I said, I'm going to use a new inner sleeve. Now, to test the fuel level meter, it's probably a good idea while it's out to test it. So I'll take a couple minutes here to set up and show you how to do that. So how these work. Chrysler's in these years used a fuel level sender. They're all exactly the same. They send a voltage in one side, and the arm lifts up and modifies a resistor board. That's a series of resistors that get higher resistance as the fuel tank is full, less resistance as the fuel tank is empty, and that's seen as a voltage drop across the resistor that goes back to the gauge, and the gauge shows you what your fuel level is based on a programmed amount. Now, as it turns out, these fuel level senders go from 16 to 160. 16 ohms to 160 ohms is the range that they use. So if you want to replace it with an autometer gauge, you need to look for an autometer gauge that's a 16 to a 160 resistance, and that will be correctly calibrated for this module. That's a little bit difficult to figure out. It's actually a modern Ford is what Autometer calls it. Sometimes you find them labeled as a Chrysler, but they're not labeled very well. The only way I knew what it actually was I measured mine myself, primarily because before I put all this back together, I want to make sure mine actually works. So I'm going to grab a couple test leads, and I'm going to hook those up. Doesn't really matter which is which, resistance goes in both directions. And let's take a measurement of what we would call our empty resistance, which is the tank completely empty. And in my case, I show 148. Now this is supposed to be a 16 to a 160. If I pick this up just a little bit and let it hang further down, I still show a 148. Now what would that show? Well, that would show that you probably at empty, if you ever got to empty, your gauge might be off ever so slightly. I mean, we're talking about a 10%. So it would be either just above or just below the empty line. Then to measure it at full, what we're going to do is we're just going to swing it all the way up to the full position, hold it for a second, and in my case, what I show is a 19 ohms. So at full, I would be 19 ohms, the same thing. My gauge, 16 to 60, I'm off by 4 ohms. That's close enough for me. You rarely ever find one of these that's right on, but as you know, you get used to your own fuel gauge, you know what's empty and what's full. And the difference is only going to be probably the width of a needle anyway. So we'll drop that back down, let it build back up to the 148 that it is in my case. What I do know is throughout the entire range though, I have a very consistent amount of resistance. So I don't have any section of the resistor board that's bad. So I'm going to go ahead and put that right back in the truck and use it just the way it was. Now, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to move on to the reassembly of this pump. Like I said, I'm not using any of these old pieces, so they're going away. There's also a little it's a little screen filter that sits on the bottom of this. You unsnap that. I've actually got a new one. I'll retain that. You never know. I may need it again someday. Now the kit that we're going to provide, the difference is primarily that it's got the same Walbro pump that's in there, exact same dimensions, but it's a 255 liter per hour pump, and it has the provisions for higher pressure. So it will actually generate a decent flow up to about 90 psi if you're going to be running a boosted application or whatever, where you want to have your fuel pressure go up along with your boost. The only reason we're going to this is you go from a 190 to 255. It's the only choice there is. There's nothing in between, and it doesn't really make any sense. It is what it is. This comes with the pigtails that are ready to go right back in our connector that we retained, and those just slide and snap right in. As part of our kit, this actually comes with an end that looks just like this one. It's just open on the end. And what we did was we went ahead and attached a 3/8 clip quick connect to go match up to our bulkhead fitting that we've created to go with this kit. So as you can see, that just drops right back in. The kit also includes new filter, which probably isn't a bad idea given that it's a real pain in the butt to get the tank off, and we don't want to have to do it twice. New screen, just like it was before. You've got a new gasket for the tank. And in the event that you were to have damaged your inner sleeve, it comes with a new inner sleeve that fits down inside there. You can use that one, you can use this one, whichever, it works fine. We'll also include some instructions, and then in the very bottom of the bag you're going to find some of the little bits and pieces you need to finish up. You've got a little rubber isolating ring that goes on top of the pump, you've got an O-ring, you've got this little bottom sealing ring that goes into the fuel inlet of the basket, and that one is actually not in mine. I've taken this apart so many times, it's probably somewhere else, but it does come with a new one regardless, so not too big a deal. Okay, so as you can see, this goes together just like it came apart. I'm not going to assemble it at this time. If I have people asking questions about how to put it back together, even though we've had instructions, I'll go ahead and do a video. But it's pretty self-explanatory. If you look the way it comes apart, I should be able to put it back together with no trouble at all. Okay, so moving on to the rest of our kit. Why is our kit so different? Well, first of all, a lot of guys, let me get that back. A lot of guys with these Dakotas and Durangos that are running magnet motors will replace those Walbro pumps with the 255. Problem is you're stuck with this. Basically, it's a fixed outflow type. It's basically got a built-in return port that returns fuel back into the tank at a preset pressure. I think the specs on these Dodges are from like 41 to 48 or somewhere around there. I can tell you for a fact that most of the ones I've had generally generate a pressure between 43 and 45, a little bit on the low side. It's a diaphragm type assembly, you can't do anything about it. And if you're running 10% below your maximum pressure, you're also running a little bit lean on your fuel delivery. The magnet motors aren't very complex, meaning that whatever fuel pressure they get, the fuel that goes into the cylinders is dependent upon the timing that the injector is open and the pressure at which the fuel is delivered to the injector. It can't make any adjustments for that. So if your regulator over time begins to wear out and deliver too much pressure back into the tank, decrease your pressure going to your motor, over time you generally deliver less pressure to your motor. So, I mean, it's what they put in. Entire assembly is not designed to be serviced by Chrysler, so basically you replace it, Rock Auto, they're 80 or 90 bucks. They probably generate a little bit higher pressure, but over time they do wear out. The other downside of these is they've got a 5/16 line going out. 5/16 simply isn't enough flow for a motor that's making over 350 or so horsepower at 43 or so PSI. If you kick it up to say 60 PSI, you might be able to get over 400, maybe close to 450 in a 5/16 line, but after that you're really going to have trouble delivering fuel to your motor. So my question has always been, when these guys replace those Walbro fuel pumps with a 255, what they do with the regulator and what they do with the 5/16 hard line that goes out to the motor. 5/16 just simply can't carry enough capacity, and the problem is you can generate all the pressure and flow you want in this motor, but the return fuel comes right through here and dumps right back in the tank. So it doesn't matter what you do until you exceed the ability to return fuel into the tank, your motor still sees exactly the same amount of fuel. It's the way it is. I think some guys might pull this off. They might go with some sort of an adjustable fuel regulator. They might step up their line to a 3/8 or a 1/2 inch or whatever their application is. I also think a lot of people that go on just swap out their 255 pump and think they've done something they really haven't. So how do we fix this problem? Well, first off, the LS motors need 58 PSI minimum to run, and so obviously this isn't going to work. So what we've come up with is exactly what a lot of guys do in these LS swaps, is we're going to use the combination filter and fuel regulator with return line that was used in the older Corvettes, the LS1 style Corvettes. They still work great. They're very inexpensive. We're going to leave that outside the tank so it's easy to service and get to, and it steps up our fuel line to 3/8, and here's how it does it. Starting with really the only custom piece in the whole kit, which is this. This is a prototype, but it will be a machined piece. It's going to be a piece of machined aluminum with the fuel nipples on each side. And where that goes is that's going to block off this big old hole right here that's left over from the fuel regulator. So that's going to drop down right inside the top of the pump. and it's going to be retained with some brass screws that will tighten it down snug and keep it I get the idea. Keep it nice and tight up against there and create a seal. So what that gives us is the ability to hook up a 3/8 fuel line from the top of the fuel tank out to the fuel rail where we're going to mount that fuel filter. The only modification that this will require is the drilling of the 3 holes to match up with the 3 holes on the adapter plate, and screwing in the 3 brass screws. Okay, so that's that. Now, fuel's going to leave here, and as I had said, the fuel pump that we have, which is the 255 Walbro, we went ahead and attached a quick connect fitting, and that's going to quick connect to the inside of the assembly to bring fuel up to the top of the tank. It makes it real nice if you ever have to service this, because it's just a quick connect. And we did that because of convenience, and also because trying to get that line to fit on there with some kind of a clamp fitting would never have been very good, and the last thing you want is to have that come apart inside your tank and have to take it out and start over. Now, in order to fit up underneath the tank, the next thing we've done is we put a 90-degree quick connect fitting on some nylon tubing. This is the same stock nylon tubing you see on almost every production vehicle nowadays. This is now 3/8 size, more than adequate enough to carry fuel to the LS motor. And that's going to connect on here, and that saves us a fitting by using a 90-degree right here, which is going to clear right up underneath the bed and go out to the frame rail of the truck. This will connect to the 3/8 size line on the combination filter regulator. And then we've got a longer line that's going to go down the frame rail of the truck to go to the front of the truck. We're using the same brake points that the OE use, which is at the fuel tank. The OE truck uses a hard line, which is 5/16. We're going to use nylon primarily because if we sell this as a kit, it makes it a lot easier to pack that up and ship it. An 8-foot piece of hard tubing is real difficult to ship. And the rolled up type hard fuel line would have to have pressed ends on it, and it would also require being unrolled, which sometimes can kink. And the reality is it's not superior to this nylon line, which is being used on almost every modern vehicle. So we just found for convenience and ease of application that this was absolutely the best way to do a kit. Now, if you have a local fuel line supplier, you can just buy the ends from us and get a long line to go down the truck. But this is the kit we've come up with. So that will go to the front of the truck, and the same brake point will now be connected with a short piece of tubing that will replace the steel braided line that was in the truck originally, and that's going to come off the frame rail and go right up to the edge of the fuel intake on the fuel rail. Of your intake right here. So that's the entire kit with all of the pieces. It's all snapped together, it all comes apart very easily, and it's all OE style, so it should be very reliable. Now, as far as fuel return goes, there's actually 2 places you can place this regulator. We've designed it so it goes in the rear by the gas tank, coming directly off of the top of the fuel tank, with this connector going to the regulator mounted on the frame rail. We did this primarily because the 3/8 line now has more than enough adequate flow to provide pressure to these motors, even in high horsepower applications. It also gives us a much shorter fuel return. And what we've done, what we've come up with for the fuel return is just plain fuel, 5/16 rubber fuel line, and we've pressed on a quick connect end that matches up to the filter regulator return line. And all we're going to do is take this boss that is formed into the top of our tank, our fuel basket cover, and we're just going to drill that out and screw in this brass fitting right here. It's not under any pressure at all, so there won't be any issue with that, and in fact it won't even need a hose clamp on the end of this. And that will return all the fuel straight back into the tank that's unused from the fuel regulator assembly. Now, if you're using a Generation 3 style motor, especially the truck motors that came with the built-in regulator on the fuel rail itself, the intake. This is a truck intake. In the Gen 3s right here, there's a fuel regulator built in, and that required a 5/16 return line to go back. As it turned out, your trucks have a 5/16 return line that's now unused. So instead of using that regulator on top of the fuel tank, what you would do is you would use the built-in regulator on the truck intake, and you would just take a short piece of your tubing that's left over, which is the piece that was originally on the truck, that braided line, and you're just going to take that from the inlet side of your fuel rail now in your Magnum motor, and you're going to put that on the return line of your truck manifold, and that's going to send the fuel back down the 5/16 line that already exists to the tank. And when it gets to the tank, what would have been connecting to here, all you're going to need then is you're going to need a way to pass it back into the top of your fuel basket. So we're going to provide basically the same thing. It's a brass threaded nipple with a piece of tubing that's going to come out and connect to your existing fuel rail. It'll be about 3 feet long. We'll measure it for sure. All the trucks are the same, so we'll provide a kit. All you'll do is drill this in, and that will be your fuel return line off of your 5/16 line. If you're running a very high horsepower application, you might want to put your fuel regulator and return line, even if you use the Corvette style, up near the front of your truck or car, and then return your fuel that way, the same using the existing 5/16 line. I'd say very high horsepower. I'd say turbo or supercharger application where you really need a lot of fuel and you're trying not to step up to a 1/2-inch line. That might be a way to get good flow all the way to the front of the vehicle and then return the excess fuel back. So those are some options you have. We will provide all those options on our website, whichever ones you want. Just let us know. We can make them all up. We might have to email you for specifics as far as length and what connectors you want on them. This has been Scott with lsstack.com.